The ATM card looked like it had survived a war, edges frayed, numbers nearly rubbed smooth after sitting in my wallet for 22 years. My mother gave it to me a week before she died, pressing it into my palm with fingers that trembled as if the plastic weighed 100 pounds. She made me promise I would only use it when I truly had nothing left. I promised, thinking it was just a dying wish and probably a small savings account she built from skipped coffees and overtime. I never checked, because it felt like stealing from a ghost, like opening a door she closed on purpose. Then, on a Thursday night in Chicago, I stood outside a bank on Wabash with $63 in my checking account, a duffel bag of clothes, and nowhere to sleep because my wife had changed the locks. I slid the card into the ATM. The machine hesitated. The screen went blank. Then it flashed, "Please see a banker immediately." I pulled the card out, ready to walk away, when the bank doors opened and a man in a suit rushed toward me. His name tag read Daniel Park, branch manager. He told me not to leave and said I needed to come inside right now. My name is Ethan Ward. I am 38, and 72 hours earlier, my wife Sloan threw me out of our condo like I was an old receipt. It was not loud. It was clean. It was practiced. 3 days before that, I came home from work and found a legal envelope on the kitchen island beside a bowl of lemons, placed like a decoration. Divorce petition. My stomach turned so fast I had to grip the counter. Sloan stepped out of the bedroom already dressed, heels on, phone in hand, like she had rehearsed the scene down to her breathing. She told me she was late before I said a word, as if my shock was an inconvenience. I asked what it was. She sighed and said it was a divorce and she was done pretending. I worked in risk systems at a mid-sized financial firm. Solid salary, quiet life, no drama. Sloan came from money, private schools and lake houses, and she used to say she loved that I was stable. Somewhere along the way, stable became small. I asked why. She laughed once and said I was fine, and fine was not what she wanted anymore. She said she was tired of being the successful one in every room while her husband blended into the wallpaper. She said I made her life look smaller than it was. I tried to talk about counseling, about time, about us. She said she had already done the thinking, and now she was just doing the paperwork. Then she delivered the final cut, calm and surgical. Her lawyer was waiting, and if I did not sign tonight, she would make sure I left with nothing but debt. I followed her out because I still believed there would be a moment where she softened, where she remembered I was human. Instead, she walked ahead like she could not wait to be rid of me, and the elevator doors closed like a verdict. Sloan took me to a white leather office downtown, the kind of place where the lobby smelled like citrus and cold ambition. Her attorney, Graham Kell, shook my hand like he was doing a chore, then sat down and opened a folder with colored tabs, already certain of the ending. He told me we could keep it civil if I signed today. He slid the settlement across the table, $25,000 and a clause that waived any future claims. I asked for time to hire my own lawyer. Graham smiled and said the offer expired the moment I walked out. He talked about forensic reviews, legal fees, and how quickly a judge could be convinced I contributed very little. His voice stayed polite while his meaning stayed sharp. Sloan stared at her phone, bored, and told me to take it or regret it. I looked at her, waiting for a flicker of guilt. She did not look up. I signed because fear is faster than pride. The second the last page was signed, Graham's tone softened like he had completed a routine procedure. Sloan stood, smoothed her skirt, and said she arranged a hotel through the weekend. Then she said she had already changed my building access, like it was normal to erase someone in real time. By the time I reached the elevator, my phone showed a notification. Access code updated. The hotel was a box near the freeway. The walls were thin, the ice machine was broken, the check sat on the nightstand like an insult wrapped in paper. On day 2, my debit card declined at a grocery store because Sloan had cut off the joint account. I stood there sweating while the cashier waited, then walked out with nothing but humiliation. On day 3, I went back to our building. The concierge told me, politely, that my name was no longer on the resident list. My key did not turn, my calls went to voicemail. I sat in the hallway with my duffel bag and realized she had planned the lockout as carefully as the paperwork. I went to the bank to deposit the settlement and figure out rent, deposits, and survival math. In line, I felt my mother's card in my wallet and remembered her promise. She had died when I was 16. She worked as a school secretary, drove an ancient Corolla, and never once complained about what life took from her. The week before cancer took her, she pressed that card into my hand and told me the pin was my birthday month and day. She said I would understand when the time came. I kept the card for 2 decades like a superstition, like an emergency exit I refused to use. Outside the ATM on Wabash with nothing left but stubbornness, I typed the PIN, watched the screen freeze, and saw the message to see a banker. Then the doors flew open and the branch manager ran toward me, breathing hard like he had sprinted from the back office. He told me not to move and said there was an alert on that account. A security guard appeared behind him, not aggressive, just present. Inside, Daniel guided me past the tellers to a small office, closed the door, and asked for my ID. His hands shook as he compared my license to the screen, and I felt my stomach sink lower, because for a moment I thought my mother had left me trouble instead of help. Daniel Park sat back after a long silence, as if he needed to choose words that would not break the room. He asked when I last accessed the account. I told him never. My mother gave me the card before she died. He nodded like he expected that answer. Then he turned his monitor toward me. My mother's name was there, along with trust identifiers I'd barely understood, and beneath it was a number so large my brain refused to accept it. $18,742,109.63. I laughed because it sounded like a mistake that belonged to someone else. I told him my mother barely afforded braces. Daniel did not smile. He said the card was a controlled access point tied to a trust structure, and there were instructions on file triggered by the first use of the PIN. He opened a drawer and placed an old envelope on the desk. The handwriting on the front stopped my breath. For Ethan, only when he has nothing left. I opened it with shaking fingers. My mother wrote that in her 20s she worked for a tiny investment partnership and accepted equity instead of raises because she needed groceries more than pride. She wrote that the stake grew quietly over decades, and she hid it on purpose because she had watched sudden wealth turn families into predators. She wanted me to grow up without being hunted and without measuring my worth in dollars. She wrote that the trust was mine, but only when I was desperate enough to use the card, because money should be a ladder, not a leash. I cried in that office, not because of the number, but because my mother had predicted the shape of my lowest day. Daniel cleared his throat and said there was another detail. One holding in the trust was a limited partner stake in Wardlight Capital Partners. The name hit like a bell. Wardlight had led a financing round for Sloane's company, the round she bragged about for months, the round she used as proof she was above ordinary people. Daniel explained carefully that I did not own her company directly, but I was now connected to the same fund network she treated like royalty. I left the bank with documents, legitimate access steps, and enough immediate liquidity to stop bleeding. That night I rented a small furnished apartment for a month, paid up front, and slept like a man who could finally breathe. The next morning I hired Priya Desai, a divorce attorney known for refusing to be bullied. She read the settlement and said it had pressure written all over it. Deadline threats, no counsel, lockout timing, cut off accounts. She filed to set it aside and demanded full financial disclosures. When Sloane called, her voice carried that familiar smirk. She told me I already signed and said I was pathetic for trying to change it. I told her I signed scared. Now I was signing nothing without my lawyer. At the hearing, Sloane arrived in a polished suit with Graham Kell beside her, still smiling. Priya laid out the timeline like a map of coercion. The judge frowned, asked why I was discouraged from counsel, and called the rushed deadline pressure not efficiency. She reopened negotiations and ordered full disclosure within 30 days. In the hallway, Sloane leaned close, perfume sharp, and told me I was making her hate me. Priya stepped between us, calm and firm, and said all communication goes through counsel now. For the first time, Sloane looked uncertain, because bullies rely on isolation, and I was no longer alone. Discovery changed everything. Without the rush settlement shielding her, Sloane had to reveal the real numbers, bonuses, equity, deferred compensation, side accounts, and the polished story she told herself about earning everything alone. Graham's tone shifted from threats to bargaining. Emails stopped saying final and started saying propose. Priya requested statements, vesting schedules, ledgers, and communications around the lockout timing. She built a record showing that the divorce was not just a breakup, it was an extraction. Depositions followed. Sloane could belittle me in a kitchen, but she could not belittle a court reporter. She tried anyway, describing me as unambitious, as an anchor, as someone she outgrew. Priya asked her to define outgrew in financial terms, to explain why the offer demanded I waive future claims without full disclosure, and to explain why joint accounts were cut off before I had independent counsel. Sloane's answers got messy, defensive, and contradictory. After the deposition, she broke the rule and texted me directly, asking if I really wanted to drag her name through this. Priya told me not to respond, so I did not. Silence became my boundary and my message. Then came Wardlight's annual investor reception, an event Sloane insisted on attending because appearances were her oxygen. Priya advised me to attend too, quietly, legally, and say nothing unless spoken to. I stood near the back with a glass of water, watching Sloane laugh with executives as if our marriage never existed. Then an older woman in a dress walked straight to me and offered her hand. She introduced herself as Marianne Holt, managing partner at Wardlight, and said she was sorry for my loss. She said my mother was one of the most disciplined investors she had ever met. Conversations around us slowed. People notice when power recognizes someone. Sloane turned, smile ready, and froze when she saw who was greeting me. Marianne continued, pleasant and loud enough to carry. She said the trust transfer confirmation was received, and her office would arrange a portfolio briefing if I wanted. Sloane stepped close, eyes bright with panic disguised as curiosity, and demanded how much my mother left me. Not "Are you okay?" Not "Why did you hide it?" Just "How much?" I told her enough. She grabbed my sleeve and accused me of letting her believe I had nothing. I met her eyes and said she was comfortable with me having nothing, and she bought my silence for $25,000 and called it dignity. Marianne excused herself smoothly. Sloane whispered I was punishing her. I told her I was correcting what she tried to erase. A month later, we settled on fair terms with proper division and documented disclosures. 6 months after that, I sat in a coffee shop, realizing money did not change my character, it just removed the leash. I paid debts, helped family, funded a consumer clinic in my mother's name, and kept the worn ATM card in my wallet as a reminder. If you stayed to the end, comment receipts, and remember, the quiet person is not always weak. Sometimes they are just waiting for you to underestimate them once.